Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. David Parnell, who is a professor of history at Indiana University Northwest, and is here to talk about a book that he published in 2023 called Belisarius and Antonina, Love and War in the Age of Justinian. Thank you for joining me.
It's a real honor to be here.
This is a book about a couple that most people are unfamiliar with. I thought it might be interesting to start by finding out how you got interested in this as a topic.
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about that a little bit because I think it shows a little bit of my academic journey and my attempt to become a historian.
Yeah, because people are wondering, why does anyone write about these things, right? So take us through this.
Right, well, I think we all have our own reasons. So for me, it started when I attended graduate school. I went to St. Louis University, and this was 20 years ago now. And I show up there, I'm a young man, and most of my colleagues, most of my fellow graduate students are also young men. And we're all pursuing our research projects. We're working independently, but sometimes alongside each other and together. So I think I was really interested in how people formed networks and relationships and worked together with things. So when my advisor wanted me to pick a topic, I looked at army officers in the Byzantine Empire and how they worked together, how they tried to gain promotion, how they worked alongside each other and sometimes competed the way young men do. Right. So I wrote a book. My first book was based on my dissertation, which I wrote in grad school, which is about all of these, officers and how they worked. And it turns out that one of these officers was the Belisarius you mentioned earlier. So when it came time for a second book project, I sort of zeroed in on him. And Belisarius had this very remarkable wife named Antonina.
So he stands out a little bit because his wife is kind of his partner throughout his career, right? And that's a little bit unusual.
Yes, that's right. So most of these men that I looked at for my project in grad school were not necessarily single. I'm sure most of them were married, but we didn't know anything about their wives. They didn't have any particular reputation or, vita, as we'd say in the academic world. They didn't have a career that we could look at. But Antonina did, so she stood out to me.
And I know from your writings, you were able to find out a lot of information about her. So she was actually written about almost as much as he was from time to time, right?
Yes, and that's unusual for the period we're talking about, 1,500 years ago. Surely the women of this period did quite a few things, but we don't often know what those things are. So to have available information about a prominent wife of a prominent general is a little unusual.
So he quickly worked his way up through the ranks and becomes a general and goes off on these campaigns, and he takes his wife with him.
Yes, she goes with him. So this is not your sort of standard military couple where one spouse goes to war and the other spouse stays at home.
And how was that received?
Clearly, some people were okay with it from the very fact that it happened, right? If literally everybody was opposed to this, there's no way she would have been on the campaign. Somebody would have stood up, somebody would have said something, but she comes. So that clearly indicates that at least some people are okay with this.
Well, this is in an environment really that almost has to tolerate this because Justinian and Theodora are sort of ruling the Byzantine Empire at this time, right? And they're sort of a partnership in a lot of ways.
Right. I think Belisarius maybe gets away with more here because his emperor is taking the lead. Justinian very famously marries a former actress named Theodora, and not just marries her, but makes her his partner in ruling, elevates her, calls her his dear God-given consort in many of the laws we have. And so she's very much front and center in the imperial office, which probably makes it easier for Belisarius to make Antonina front and center in his military operations.
And Antonina is also acquainted with or friends with Theodora?
Yes. We don't know when exactly that friendship starts. Some of us think maybe it started even before they married their husbands. Maybe they were friends from a young age. But certainly by the time they're married to their husbands, they form a relationship with each other. And so we have sort of a partnership between the two women, Theodora and Antonina, and between the two men, Justinian and Belisarius.
That's very interesting. And so his first big campaign, I think, is invasion of Africa. Is that right? And this is a major campaign. I think this is comparable to other, like how big of a was this? He landed a lot of troops and went through Africa, and she was with him on all of this. But tell us about that campaign a little bit.
Yeah, so this is a campaign to restore Roman authority to lands that used to be Roman but had been invaded and taken over since then. So Northern Africa, today's Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, used to be ruled by the Romans, but it was conquered by the Vandals in the 5th century. And so Justinian really wants to get North Africa back. So he wants to send a force to retake it. That requires an army, and it requires a navy to transport that army from Constantinople, today's Istanbul, to Tunisia.
So for ancient times, this is a huge, huge operation.
A huge operation. We're talking something like 20,000 soldiers, give or take, 500 ships, give or take, and all the sailors that are sailing those ships. So this is a major investment by the imperial government to try to retake North Africa, and Belisarius is in charge of all of it, and Antonina's right there alongside of him. This is very similar to sort of an operation to recover land in World War II. So I think the most common one we think of is D-Day, right? That this is a naval operation transporting troops from England to France across the English Channel. We can also think of the Allied attempt to retake North Africa itself. It's got a nice sort of geographic synchronization there.
Oh, and she goes with him.
And she goes with him, which is unusual.
Yeah.
As far as we know, most of the time when a combat operation is about to occur, a spouse doesn't go with the general. Maybe if the general's going to a peaceful theater just to be on garrison duty, a spouse might come. But she's coming in an active military operation against hostile forces. She's going to be right in the thick of it with the soldiers.
Yeah. And I understand that sometimes he would conquer a city, in which case he would be ruling that city, right? And he would go off to the next battle, and he might leave her behind. And she was actually in charge of running the city? Did she have that much authority?
Yes, so she has plenty of authority. So she might help to rule a city. She might be sent off on a resupply mission. She might say, come bring back some supplies for us. And she goes and she leads that and leads reinforcement troops and supplies back to where Belisarius is. And this is remarkable that a woman of any kind is given this authority.
Yeah. And I know there was some smear campaigns about their relationship and about her. I'd like to know a little bit about those, and then I'm curious if you think that was because people resented the fact that a woman had all this power and authority.
I think probably so. So let's talk about the smear campaigns, and then we'll get back to the why. So the big smear against Antonina is a claim that she had an affair, not with just anybody, but with her own adopted son. So this is, Hollywood insider levels of intrigue.
And you're calling this a smear because, as far as you know, there's no substance to it.
As far as I am concerned, it is not a founded accusation.
Yeah.
This is something that is invented intentionally to make everybody involved look bad. Belisarius looks bad because he can't control his wife. Right. His wife looks bad because she can't control her passions. Their family as a whole looks bad because it's not just an affair, it's an affair with somebody within the family, right? Yeah. It's very carefully constructed to make the whole family look bad in a particular way, and that makes me very suspicious of it.
And how does that play out? Do they just ignore it, or does it cause problems for them? Because it comes up again later on, I think, right?
Yeah, the accusation happens multiple times, and according to Procopius of Caesarea, sort of our embedded source with the couple, it eventually involves the imperial couple getting involved, Justinian and Theodora, coming in to sort of mediate the family dispute and settle things, and they allegedly side with Antonina, and Belisarius has to cry and fall down before her feet and kiss her feet and lick the bottom of all this stuff.
Literally lick the bottom
Literally
of her feet?
Lick the bottom of her feet and call her his savior.
I hope she had some new slippers on.
Right. I'm suspicious, right? This again sounds a little too, you're trying to make a guy look bad. You say he licks the bottom of his wife's feet, then I suppose that's an accusation you might make against somebody you want to say is a little odd.
Yes, it's certainly distasteful.
Right.
Yes. So maybe just to fill in a little bit here, tell us about Constantinople at this time.
Constantinople is the biggest city in Europe at this time. It houses...
And by the way, just so everyone understands, this is today called Istanbul, right? After it was conquered by the Ottomans in the 15th century. Okay, but at this point it's still Constantinople, obviously, so go ahead.
That's right. It's still Constantinople. Today's Istanbul. It is astride Europe and Asia on the Bosporus Straits there, the European part of what is today Turkey, and it is a massive city. houses allegedly 500,000 people at this time, has a chariot racing arena within it that can house 100,000 spectators at a time.
Really?
Has the largest church in the Christian world at the time, Hagia Sophia, built by Justinian during this time period in which we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a very famous city, and it's a time when Paris is a village by comparison.
It was a quarry town, as I understand.
And London is barely thought of, right?
Right.
These are cities that today are major staples
Right.
of Europe. They don't matter in the 6th century. Constantinople is
Yeah.
where it's at.
Yeah. And Justinian then is one of the more prominent rulers of Constantinople, right? A little background on him, perhaps?
Justinian's very well known because he does multiple things. He takes over these territories in the west, largely through Belisarius, like
Yeah.
we talked about earlier. He establishes a revised law code, which not only is important for his time, the 6th century, but gets picked up in the west in the later Middle Ages, and then it gets forwarded through multiple Western medieval kingdoms all the way up to the time of Napoleon. When Napoleon creates his law code, he's still using substantial portions of the laws that Justinian had written in Constantinople, something like 1,200 years before
I didn't know
him.
that. That's very interesting.
It's incredibly important.
Yeah.
And of course, then Justinian also builds this big church, Hagia Sophia, which is top of the list for anybody visiting Istanbul.
Yeah, an impossibly large dome at the time.
An impossibly large dome, the largest dome in the world at the time.
Yeah. Now, in the Western Empire, which is centered around Rome, right? You've got things are in turmoil at this point, right?
Yes, in fact, the Western Empire has largely ceased to exist by this point. It's been taken over by various peoples that historians typically call barbarians. That's not a very nice thing to call them, but they're non-Romans who have migrated in or invaded, depending on the terminology you want to use, and they established their own kingdoms in Italy and Spain and what is today France and in North Africa, as we mentioned earlier. So Justinian is interested in restoring Roman authority to these regions. That's one of his big goals as emperor.
Okay, and then the papacy at this point was somewhat weaker and more dependent on Constantinople.
Yeah, the popes at this point are really, we call them popes, but they're really still more like regular bishops
Right.
Of other cities. They have a little bit more sort of respect and honor than the other bishops, but they don't really have the kind of temporal or physical power that they'll have later on in the Middle Ages, or even today when there's a Vatican City. Right? There's no papal state for the Romans at this
Considered
time.
first amongst equals, I think was the expression at the time, right? And so our famous couple here get involved with basically unseating the Pope at some point, right? Tell us that story.
Yeah, so Belisarius and Antonina are in Rome. They've restored Rome to the control of the Romans for the first time in 60 years. It's a big moment. We can imagine parades and celebrations and that kind of thing.
Right.
But the problem is, even though they've recovered Rome, they haven't defeated the enemy yet, which is the Ostrogoths. So the Ostrogothic army is encircling Rome while Belisarius and Antonina are within
The
it.
Ostrogoths are in Sicily?
They got kicked out of Sicily by Belisarius on his way to Rome. So
I
he
see,
starts in
okay.
Sicily, he works his way up north through the toe of Italy and then up towards Rome.
Okay.
So at this point in 536...
That's the same route Patton took, I think.
Yeah. If you're going to invade Italy from the south, it makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
So Belisarius and Antonina are sitting in Rome, but they're nervous because they're surrounded by this Ostrogothic army. And they are convinced that the Pope sympathizes with the Ostrogoths and not with them.
Now, why would they think that?
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
The Pope was actually appointed by the king of the Ostrogoths.
Okay.
So,
That might make them a little suspicious.
it might make them a little suspicious.
all right.
Now, on the other side of the ledger, the Pope did apparently say, why don't you come up to Rome, to Belisarius, when he's already marching towards Rome? So maybe the Pope's making the best out of a difficult situation. But whatever their reason, they think the Pope isn't loyal to the Roman cause. They think he is a mole for the Ostrogothic regime, that he's going to somehow let the Ostrogothic army in. So Belisarius and Antonina call the Pope up into a room, and they're sitting side by side, the two of them. And instead of Belisarius speaking to the Pope, it's Antonina.
Okay.
And she says, Lord Pope, why have you sided with the Goths over us? And he is not allowed to answer. She says, "Your power is taken from you," and a deacon runs in and rips the vestments off the Pope and then hustles him out the door, and he's no longer Pope. And Belisarius and Antonina appoint a new Pope, just like that, easy as you please.
So they had authority over the civil matters and also authority over ecclesiastical matters.
Right, well, they were the only ones in Rome with an army at a time, so I think nobody was going to argue the legal niceties of who had the religious control with them at that moment.
that worked for Caesar, too, as I recall, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah, well, Caesar also could ignore omens when he felt the need to.
So what happens after this? Where do they go from here?
Well, from Rome, they head north to Ravenna, which is the current capital of the Ostrogothic kingdom in northern Italy. They take over Ravenna, and I think Ravenna is just worth mentioning because while they're there is a very famous mosaic executed on the walls of the Church of San Vital in Ravenna, which we all know today includes Justinian and Theodora. I think Belisarius and Antonina are also in that mosaic.
I hope they don't have halos.
No halos, but they're standing next to their sort of patrons, the Emperor Justinian, the Empress Theodora, and that's the image we used for the book cover, actually, was a picture of the couple in these mosaics that I think is Belisarius and Antonina.
That's interesting. And there was some sneaky things going on here, right, during that period. Antonina was negotiating with Justinian and Theodora about getting someone pushed out or something. What was the story there?
Yeah, so Antonina, sort of flexing her power, is working on trying to get rid of another enemy. So apparently, this is after the Pope Silverius thing. So apparently getting rid of a pope sort of whetted her ambition. So when she came back to Constantinople a few years later, she thought, well, why don't I get rid of this guy? He's the Praetorian prefect. This is the highest civilian title in the office. So,
John of Cappadocia?
Yes, John the Cappadocian.
John the Cappadocian.
He has a title that's roughly equivalent to our, saying, like Secretary of State or something like that, right? So she wants to
just like Nancy Reagan getting rid of the Secretary of State.
Right, yeah, that'd be something like that, right. So she wants to get rid of this guy, and apparently Theodora does too. Her boss is her patron, the Empress. So they work together, and Antonina comes up with this scheme. She says, I'm going to pretend to be disloyal to you. I'm going to say we should get rid of the Emperor and the Empress, and we should let my husband Belisarius be Emperor. And I'm going to tell this to John the Cappadocian.
Right.
And we'll see what he says.
John was a little naive, wasn't he?
A little naive, maybe a little hopeful that she was being truthful here.
Yeah.
But John, for whatever reason, decides to believe Antonina. He says, oh, I'm with you. Let's depose the emperor. Let's get rid of him. And then Antonina simply goes and tells the emperor and empress, well, you know what John said. So she tells them that, and they have this dramatic moment where the emperor tells Antonina, okay, I want you to meet with him and get him on record saying this. So they get together in Antonina's house, and they're having a tete-a-tete. They're talking together.
Yeah.
But unbeknownst to John, on the other side of the walls are all of Justinian's guards.
This is so Shakespeare, right?
Right. And so the moment John says, yes, let's get rid of the emperor, the guards sort of rush out to arrest John the Cappadocian. And Antonina, you can just imagine her sitting there smiling, this Cheshire cat grin during all of this.
Who thought history was this interesting? So that's certainly up there with anything Machiavelli ever dreamed up, I think.
I think so, yeah. Maybe he took some cues from this story.
Yeah. Well, so you have a kind of a mission to try to bring history to the general public, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. If we can step away from the power couple here for a minute. So you've got an epic history of TV YouTube channel, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. I will have to confess it's not my own YouTube channel,
okay.
But I did consult for this YouTube channel. So this is a YouTube channel that does historical documentaries for the general public that is unbound by the rules of television. So the producer used to work for the History Channel and got tired of all the constraints. Your episodes have to be so many minutes. We have to leave room for commercial breaks, all this stuff. So he actually quit that and started this YouTube channel. And he happened to have an interest in Belisarius, and he asked me to consult on it. So this was an opportunity for me to share my research with somebody who is doing a YouTube documentary.
And if anybody's interested in hearing more about this, it's called Belisarius, the Last Great Roman, right?
Yes, on Epic History TV on YouTube.
Yeah. So that goes into what we've been talking about and much more, I'm sure, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It covers this remarkable career, his relationship with Antonina, the ups and downs of all of his battles and his wars.
Now, you're generally interested in Byzantine history. Let's discuss that a little bit. What's unique about Byzantine history? I know the Roman Empire splits under Constantine, right? And he creates an eastern capital in Constantinople, and also leaves Rome as kind of the authority over the western part of the empire. And then Byzantium doesn't get weakened as much by the attacks of the northern tribes and things, right? And it stands a little longer than Rome does. And I think you make the argument that it really kind of preserves classical culture a little bit longer when the rest of the world is changing.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the Byzantine Empire is very interesting for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
One simply being its longevity. Like, it just lasts so long. When we talk about the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the date everybody always gives is 476 AD. Yeah. Well, the Byzantine Empire, if it had an ending date, is 1453 AD. So we're talking an extra 1,000 years.
Yeah, an extra millennium.
Yeah, an extra millennium. This is a society that's incredibly long-lived and has to be incredibly resilient over that time because there's so many ups and downs.
Why do you think we're so focused on Rome in the West, and we don't really hear about the history of Eastern Europe?
Oh, I have so many answers to that question. But the shorthand answer is that this is the way that certain people for a long time have wanted us to think.
I see.
Because peoples in the West from the moment of Charlemagne wanted to claim the idea of being Roman for themselves. So that means that those other Romans over there in the East at Constantinople, they couldn't really be Romans. So we're going to call them something else.
So Charlemagne was trying to reassemble the Roman Empire, essentially, so he could claim to be the Roman emperor.
Exactly. So it was inconvenient for him that there happened to be emperors in Constantinople who said they were Roman emperors.
Yeah.
So from that moment, and for a variety of reasons, for over a millennium after that, we started calling those people in the East Greeks or Byzantines instead of Romans. And it made it a little different.
Although they were still calling themselves Romans.
They called themselves Romans, absolutely.
Even today, you get people from from Eastern Europe who consider themselves descendants of the Roman Empire.
Right, there are still people living in Turkey today who, if you ask them, they will say, I am Rum, I am Roman.
Yeah.
And that's astounding that this continues on this long. So longevity, one reason for interest, but also I think, why we don't talk about it as much is it feels a little different, right? There's this infusion of orthodoxy, there's this sense of exoticism of the East that makes Byzantium feel a little bit different than Rome. There's a feeling that Roman culture is transmitted directly from the Roman Empire to the Renaissance to the modern world in the West, where we don't need the Byzantine Empire over there. Like, all these things sort of play into.
And what's really ironic is that the Renaissance was kind of dependent on the fall of Constantinople. Should we talk about that briefly before we close here? I mean, the Constantinople falls, and what happens?
Yeah, I think it's certainly interesting that at the time that Constantinople is under attack by the Ottoman Turks, you have multiple intellectuals fleeing Constantinople and bringing with them copies of works of classical antiquity, copies of the Greek philosophers and the great orators.
Which had not been preserved in Western Europe.
Right, and they're teaching. They're teaching the peoples of Italy how to read Greek, how to look at these ancient texts. And this is what helps make that Renaissance possible.
Yeah, and it really, it almost seems like the Renaissance follows the trade routes of where those books and those emigres were going, right?
Right, yeah, it starts in Italy and moves north, just like those emigres are going, yes.
Yeah. So what remnants of this are left today? Have you thought about that at all? I mean, if somebody wanted to go to Eastern Europe and to, look at it as an example of Roman history, where would you go? What would you look at?
That's a great question. I would start in Istanbul because, of course, why not? So you're going to see Hagia Sophia. You're going to see Justinian's great church there. You can see the remnants of this hippodrome that I mentioned, or this chariot racing arena. And then all along the coasts of what is today Greece and Turkey, you're going to find cities that have these Roman ruins preserved. And you
Yeah.
can tour all sorts of cities. Ephesus is a great example. You can walk along these huge colonnaded streets in Western Turkey, an area that we don't typically today think of as super Roman, right? People think of Roman, they think of Italy, they think of Rome itself, but
Well, it was Greece up until most of the 14th century, right?
right.
Yeah. Have you traveled much? Have you?
Yeah, I'm a big traveler. I love going. I've been to Istanbul, I've been to Rome 3 times. And
Yeah.
my most recent trip to Rome was in February 2020, so I guess you can imagine how that one ended up if you remember what was happening in the world in February 2020,
Yeah,
especially in Italy. So it was not the ideal time to be there.
Right. Well, things are opened up now. And that's all the time we have for our program. I want to thank Dr. David Parnell for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. I'll see you next time.